always nervous. I'm always prepared for the worst. So I think um, I was very honest about that thing I said the other day that I get nervous every time I do this. And you didn't believe
How's
me.
your tummy?
It is in better
Tummy
shape.
feeling all right?
It's feeling
All right.
okay. It's feeling okay.
Good.
Are you ready for this this spicy episode today?
Yeah.
Is that a yes? Because you got quiet on me.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was playing in the other window. I'm
Oh my
sorry.
goodness. Oh my goodness.
Two Jasons.
It's too Jason squared. That's a nightmare. Oh, just hush. Greetings. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. So glad to have you guys here with us tonight for what should be a very spicy conversation with our returning guest, Adolph Reed Jr. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you're alerted whenever we go live. That simple passive gesture goes a long way in the support of independent left media. Also, after the show, if you're a patron, we'll be going to the phones to take calls and hear what y'all have to say about what we discussed on the show today. For those of you that are subscribers and patrons, thank you for your continued support. That is the fuel in the engine in the TIR machine. If you'd like to wear your support, then let the people know with TIR merch. And who else can describe the merchandise that we have here at TIR better than the faceless voice of reason, show producer extraordinaire, M. Tucson.
Hello, everyone. For our merch, we've got snapbacks, snapping back. We've got, let's see. Okay, we've got mugs. We've got a t-shirt with Pascal's smiling face on it. We have a mouse pad with Pascal's smiling face on it, and another mug. Again, with Pascal's smiling face on it. You're welcome.
We decided to double down on Pascal. We heard the people. The people said they wanted more Pascal, and we said we're going to give you Pascal, but we're going to give you a smiling Pascal, a more docile Uncle Benish Pascal.
Uncle Benish,
and that's what you get.
That's an adjective.
Just kidding. It's more like Benson. No one watching the show knows who Robert Guillaume or what Benson is.
I love Benson.
He is my homie, my dog. He is my co-host. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Peace and greetings, M. Tucson.
Hello.
Pascal, did you watch Benson as a young person?
Absolutely. You know what's interesting thing about Benson? My father said about Robert Guillaume
that he was Haitian.
No, he didn't say that.
Okay.
My father said that Robert Guillaume is the only actor he believed was qualified to play the role of Toussaint Louverture because he actually looked like him.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's true. That's true.
oh. Robert Guillaume is kind of a. I would, if we could Adolph in the champagne real quick, I just want to know what he thought about Guillaume because he had some acting chops, and
He did.
in Derek Bell, I think one of the Hudlin brothers for HBO did a series called Cosmic Slop, which was kind of supposed to be a black Twilight Zone, and they opened that show. We've played it on this show several times. The Derek Bell Race Traders. He actually made a short, if you will, based off the Race Traders story, and Robert Guillaume played the black character, and just really brought that episode to life. So
Vividly remember it.
I find it a good episode as a conversation starter. It's one of those shows.
Well, there's a lot of conversation you can have about Derek Bell.
We're just talking Race Traders. We're not talking that dreaded CRT. Also, before we start, I want to say thank you to all that came out to hang with some divorcees for our inaugural Commie Valentines. Ben and I plan on doing more of these impromptu events. We had a good time at the Rainbow in LA. I saw some people asking what kind of place it was. It is a bar and grill on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, California. I guess they thought we were at a gay club, and it is not. It's just a bar. I saw that. But yeah. So we'll be doing more stuff. We don't know exactly where we'll be, but we will give more notice. We were talking about doing something for St. Patrick's Day. I definitely want to do something where there weren't a lot of white people, so we'd probably be celebrating it in San Isidro. There's no white people there.
Okay.
So I have to do that. Now, before we bring in our guest, in this current political moment where there are no real strong left organizations or movements, nostalgia for the new left of the 60s and black power fetishism are at the forefront of the minds of this aspiring left of the 21st century. But did the Panthers really have the numbers and the potential to liberate us? Is simply blaming everything on state intervention an easy out to a complicated question? Were there limitations with the civil rights movement that prevented it from doing more? From his recent article on Bayard Rustin and Nonsite. Rustin saw politics through a concrete strategic lens, which provided a perspective that has become increasingly remote from both academic and activist experience. Indeed, as demonstrated in the essay selected here, he explicitly rejected the moralistic discourse that he saw undergirding much of black power and new left politics, as well as the tendency to reduce the sources of inequality to psychological factors like prejudice, discrimination, or generic racism. He was committed to a vision of a just society that hinged on a pursuit of broad economic equality, and he was convinced, as most popular front-era black radicals were, that advancing towards economic equality in general was essential for Black Americans, both because Black Americans were predominantly in the working class and because continued improvement for Blacks required being part of a broad political coalition centered on improving the lives and economic security of all working people. He also understood that realizing such an egalitarian agenda under American capitalism would require the efforts of a different sort of movement, a popularly based institutional politics, and that generating that movement would require a strategic and programmatic shift from the watershed moment of 1965. In one of his most controversial essays, From Protest to Politics, The Future of the Civil Rights Movement, Rustin argued that the legislative victories of 1964 and, in anticipation, 65 effectively fulfilled the goals of the civil rights movement, and that the movement, which he suggested probably warranted a new name, needed to reorient towards pursuit of an agenda centered on broad economic redistribution. He reiterates that argument in 1967 in his 1967 address, Firebombs or Freedom Budget, reproduced here, in which he stumps for the freedom budget for all Americans that A. Philip Randolph Institute had released the year before. In the 1967 address, he asserts, "I think before I talk about the freedom budget, it is necessary for us to make some analysis of where we are now, because everybody is writing great and long articles about prejudice and discrimination in the United States as if we were back in 55 or 56 or 57 or 50 or 60 or 62 or 3 or 4. The fact is, my friends, we are in a totally different period in the problem of civil rights that we have ever been in our history. And practically none of the experience of the past is particularly significant. Now, I want you to know in the present period, we are dealing with practically no fundamental question in the minds of Negroes, which are Negro problems. For what Negroes are interested in is decent housing, decent jobs, decent education, and the right of participation in decision making. Please welcome our guest, friend of show, the Adolph Reed.
Clap, clap, clap.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see you guys, as always. I want to start out, though, by saying about Robert Guillaume. A little-known fact is that his longtime partner, Fay Hauser, who also appeared, I think, in Roots 2 and in the remake of Lilies of the Field as a made-for-TV movie, was actually my college classmate at Chapel Hill. Yeah, and my former roommate's girlfriend. So small world. But I also say though that quote that you just read from the Firebombs or Freedom Budget essay is like, it's almost like the subsequent half century plus of Black political life, or what we understand as Black politics, has been largely about trying to deny the reality of every point that Rustin made in that piece. And it's interesting in that regard, too, that for so much of contemporary Black political discourse and even, cultural production, it's like history stopped before 1965, right? I mean, that right? I mean, like everything that we're supposed to refer to make sense of our current circumstances drives us back to slavery or to Jim Crow or some earlier, just and it's almost like the thrust of what we think of as Black political or Black politics at this is all about obscuring the significance of the sequelae of the Voting Rights Act and institutionalization and incorporation of Black people into as both as individuals and as strata in the country.
I had read your piece probably around the time it came out on the suggestion of Pascal Robert, and then revisited it again a few weeks back when I was writing a piece for Sublation called "Is the Contemporary Left a Lifestyle Brand?" And I between go ahead.
I've seen that piece. Send it to me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely send it to you. But I definitely got a lot of inspiration from what you were writing in this non-site piece, as well as Paul Prescott had sent me some of Adolph's, some of Rustin's writing as well, which and I think I even might have quoted some of it in that piece. I can't remember. Or maybe it got edited out. But I know Pascal is ready to drop some questions. He is prepared.
Okay. Sounds good.
Adolph, I really appreciated your piece. It was very, very. You threw some haymakers in that one. You threw some haymakers in that piece. It took me back to vintage Adolph Reed of the 1990s class notes, because you spared no victims to your pen in terms of getting at your point. The question I want to ask you is that, I don't know if you're aware of this. Michelle and Barack Obama are sponsoring a film adaptation on the life of Bayard Rustin for Netflix.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
And as you probably know, based on both of our positions on the Obamas, anything that they do for any kind of reason would immediately bring suspicion, particularly.
Right.
Now, we're going
to have you heard anything about the thrust of the film or what it focuses on about Rustin?
I haven't heard anything about the film. I haven't even seen a trailer. I don't even think there's a trailer released yet. Right. I think they have named who the actor is playing Rustin.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very circumspect with the fact that the Obamas were choosing Rustin as their centerpiece to do a film for Netflix.
Right.
But in retrospect, and we do know about the tragic ending of Bayard Rustin's politics. Right. I'd like for you to explain what at this particular contemporary moment caused you to reflect on Rustin as the avatar of this piece in the moment that we are right now.
Well, it's kind of prosaic, man. I mean, Non-Site had already decided to do a special session where we published several of Rustin's less well-known essays that are pretty powerful. And Preston Smith's fine piece on Black Political Incorporation prior to 1965 was also going to be a part of that issue, along with Todd Cronin's a symposium around Todd Cronin's new book, Red Aesthetics. And I just, what happened actually was I wrote an email to Ray and also Todd on some of my just reflection on my personal engagement with the BPP in the early 70s. And they both thought it would be good for me to expand that and to write it up. And it turned out that it worked for Non-Site. I mean, Rustin has been an interesting figure because but that mid 1960s moment, is an interesting moment. And look, like everybody else, as a young radical, I was not a fan of Bayard Rustin in 1965. I mean, I think I've mentioned on your podcast before that I came into the movement via Black Power, right, as a 19-year-old. So I was primed to reject Rustin as an Uncle Tom, whatever else. But why it's important to keep paying attention as history keeps evolving, right? And in a lot of ways, so I mean, I'll grant that Rustin may well have been too optimistic about the potential for developing a social democratic coalition that he wanted at the time. I don't know whether he was or not, because the point is that the Black Power stuff cut into that effort from one end, and the war cut into it from another end, right? Or the war and backlash, I guess you could say. But I think it's useful for us to reflect on the assessments that people like Rustin made of the movement at that point, because of the first quote that Jason read from my essay, that the Rustin was a guy whose politics was always rooted in concrete strategy and was goal oriented, and his perspective. I mean, I don't believe in prescience, but the perspective that he had on many of the tendencies in the early and mid 60s, even the late 60s, because of the way that it was grounded in concrete practice and strategic objectives, helped him understand the limits of what a lot of people are jumping up and down and getting happy about it. And I think, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, is it immature for us to try to throw Rustin out Is it because of his informant at the end of his life where he gets a little more right wing and definitely becomes an informant? Is it wrong for us to throw the man out entirely?
Well, it's absolutely wrong to throw the man out, because in the first place, you shouldn't be looking for the damn man anyway, right? I mean, it's but the sense in which we're all political actors trying to make the world that we're in, right? And one of the problems that we have is the tendency to want to find somebody to revere, right? Like if we were, just listen to Rustin, or just listen to Martin Delaney, or if we just listen to Pygmy Markham, right? Whatever. I mean, but so I think it's wrong and romantic. As for being immature, I would say that, except I know a lot of lefties from my cohort, even some older than I am, whose views about Rustin and Rustin's arguments froze in 1964, and so it's so unless it's a kind of immaturity that reflects going into second childhood, right, to something more problematic going on than just being immature. But I think it's politically counterproductive and dilettantish, basically, right? I mean,
is Rustin speaking to a bit of immaturity in his essays in this? I think it's 1970, where he talks about hey, you guys love the Black Panthers. There's only a couple thousand of them.
Right. Oh man, yeah. I mean, that essay in particular, like I'd never seen that one before. And actually, you know what? That's the essay that prompted me to write the email, because Touré will tell you that for as long as he can remember, he's heard me saying that by 1970, probably half the Black Panthers were cops, right, or thugs, or cops and thugs. And then to see Rustin saying the same thing in the same year.
Yeah. And
I wasn't a Rustin fan at that point either, right? But I was somebody who had to deal with Panthers on the ground, or Panthers, right, on the ground in my own work, and I've had that problem with them. I mean, and it was so Cedric Johnson, I'll give him a plug, because it's a great essay. A dude, I think in Wisconsin or somewhere, maybe Canada, wrote a critique of Cedric's "The Panthers Can't Save Us" essay, a guy named Vernon, that came out in Catalyst. And Cedric just showed me the galleys of his response, which are great. He makes all the points that everyone needs to make at this particular juncture that we're at now. And I suggest all of your readers find that piece when it comes out. But I mention that because I've said to Cedric before too. Yeah, my nose is itching, man. Like, and I haven't been doing cocaine, so you know. No, but I realize it must look like.
Yeah, a little bit. A little cokish.
Yeah.
Okay. Zizekian.
But anyway, what I've mentioned to Cedric before, that I've always appreciated the nuance that he can bring to discussing the Panthers. And I agree with every bit of it. And I think it's partly because of my own history with them, but probably more so, the half century in between of hearing so many different versions of if police hadn't killed the Black Panthers, then we'd be free now. That at heart they have that I tend to focus more on acting the overstatement than I've given them props. But the fact is, I mean, the Panthers. The Panthers obviously had some serious social presence in Oakland, and they had some in Chicago and a few other cities around, even Philadelphia, and even. But they were never the kind of force anywhere. Pardon me, that Panther idolatry, that hot sauce at Forward, that Panther idolatry wants to make them or make them to have been, and frankly, especially when it comes from white people. The Panther fetishism it really makes me think of the Ralph Bakshi animated film Fritz the Cat, which is about he's a cat, but he's basically a middle-class boy who gets alienated from his surroundings and wants to go find himself among the black people, basically. And I think there's a lot of, and then there's the fashion show aspect of it, which was the problem even then, man. I mean, by the early 1970s, you could tell, right, that people were appropriating a lot of this stuff as fashion. The big hat, the leather jacket, the beret, all kind of stood in for politics. And it's happening again. You need only look back to whatever year that was when Beyonce's dumbass did that strip show in the Super Bowl.
Now, Adolph, as you know about me, I spent quite a number of years writing for Black Agenda Report, and both of my mentors, Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon, were active members of the Black Panther Party.
And a lot of them came through the BPP, just like they came through a lot of sectarian organizations too. I mean, that's another important point. And I think I make this point, like in the essay. I mean, nobody comes from nothing, right? Like everybody's had formative political experiences, and the Panthers opened a lot of younger and maybe not so younger people up to some version of anti-capitalist politics, often considered Marxist, right? And a lot of people, or a good number of people, took that experience and went on and did other things with it. But one of the problems, and this wasn't just with the Panthers, but one of the problems with the radical movements of the 60s is that the dialectic that developed between the movement organizations and the mass media was such that people who were old enough to be identified as stars of the movement just stopped developing politically and intellectually, right? It's almost like, I mean, how performers or actors or musicians or whatever can freeze themselves in the persona of their peak popularity, right? A simple way to put it is Norman Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, or Jackie Mason, or I can think of some other black ones, Nipsey Russell. And you inhabit that persona. But from the standpoint of a political person, once you do that, there's no more learning going on. There's no more. I could have mentioned Angela Davis, but there's no more growing with experience, and most of all, there's no more capacity to reflect on one's own history, right? I mean, not one's own biography, because who cares about that? But the history of one's own involvements, and to reassess them critically, right? That stuff's gone. So what happens is you become this persona that you live in and have to protect. And in some ways, the worst people to approach for critical reflection on the social movements of the 60s, though it's not just true about that, but that's what we're talking about. The worst people to approach are the people whom you would think to approach because you knew about them in the newspapers, right? Because they often have the most nostalgia to protect, right? The sense of their own having come of age. I mean, it's really crazy, man. I mean, so many people went into politics in the 60s looking for self-fulfillment, right? And I mean, as I've often said, one of my two mottos is it's better to be lucky than good. And I was just younger enough, right, that I was close enough to see what was happening with Carmichael and Mark, Angela, and the rest of them, Seal and Newton and whatever. and the older people I worked with in North Carolina who became sort of icons, Howard Fuller, for instance. But so young that I was never anything but a foot soldier, and never thought about being anything but a foot soldier. Never had any aspirations to be anything other than a foot soldier. But so I was able to avoid the temptation. Not that anybody would have wanted to make me that anyway, but it had. Right, I had the resources to avoid the temptation. But I was close enough to watch it happen. Right, and it's just weird, man. I mean, it's not what you would think. Right, like you come into left politics from a standpoint and a sensibility that's more associated with the politics of the Third International, right, than with some shit called the youth movement. It's just a different orientation.
Do you think that has something to be said about the boomer generation that kind of keeps these narratives afloat?
Oh my God.
You know,
yeah.
We've talked about it before, that they kind of controlled the nostalgia market throughout the 80s and 90s and even into the early 2000s. You know, movies like Forrest Gump, all the way till we have now the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, which still keeps playing on that great man of history myth, which kind of makes people look at the Panthers in this maybe unfair light. The same thing you can say about the Weatherman, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's right, man. And I mean, and as like left politics has become increasingly disconnected from winning things, right? It's become increasingly performative, right? And like, I mean, I could see this a long time ago. I could see this decades ago. I mean, anybody who watched it could see it. That young people were forming their understandings of social movements of the 60s from old newsreels and freeze frames of demonstrations of the Panthers standing out with on the courthouse steps in Sacramento, and the images, and you see it now. But you see it with the BLM people, man, but even music videos or rap. I mean, well, hip hop videos. The appropriation, miming the still photos or the newsreel footage of what radicals looked like and how they spoke and the pronunciamentos that they made, all like on a Hollywood set, right? And there's a Potemkin quality to the whole thing. It's frustrating. But there's no question that the boomers have conspired to keep this going, and showing up in a lot of perverse ways, right? So, like in 2008, right? I mean, remember how many times we all heard versions of, I never heard anything about Barack Obama, but my 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old, 20-year-old came home really excited, and I just kind of fell in their excitement, because we all know that the young people should be who we take our cues from, because they don't have any of the real world experience that would corrupt them. And my good friend Alex Willingham said around 1990, when in one of the earlier eruptions of Pay Attention to the Young People, like he observed one day, so does this mean we're supposed to take our political cues from a group of people who like Michael Jackson, right? Because that's what that shit came down to. But you know, I mean, as the old, well, I'll say one more thing about the boomers. I mean, when Cedric did the symposium in New Politics around his the Panthers can't save us essay, or won't save us essay. Kim Moody, who's a very, very smart and solid long-term trade union-based smart Marxist activist, just wrote a response. It just kind of gave vent to all of his nostalgia about having been a young man with Panthers and one summer and how formative that was. And people like Louis Project, right, were always attacking the likes of us for.
Oh my God.
That's one problem we're having. But was always attacking the likes of us for saying anything nice about Rustin, and I believe that Kim did the same thing. I mean, and it's just a wrong way to approach history. It's the wrong way to approach the past. It's an ahistorical way to approach the past. And again, it's especially striking when it's expressed by people who are supposed to be Marxists. And I thought the one thing we're supposed to do was kind of tough-minded and analytical and materialist in our approaches, taking sense of the past. But yeah, I mean, the book had a lot to do with it. I'm sorry, Pascal.
One of the greatest quotes that Cedric Johnson exposed me to on this paradigm of particularly white leftists and their fetish obsession with Black radicalism is the quote that Harold Cruz puts in The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, I think, where he says that they think that Black people are all storming the barricades, ready for revolution.
Right. Right. Well, so I'll give myself a plug, right? I'm just starting a column in The Nation. And the first one should be coming out soon. And the epigraph to it is like a companion to the Cruz quote, but from Ralph Ellison, right? From The World in a Joke. And the sentence is something like, "Hey, watch out, Jack, there's people under there," right? I mean, but yeah, it's the same thing. And Ellison goes on to talk about how, for some people, just beginning a sentence with "the Negro is, does, thinks, feels, whatever" is like a license to give vent to your wildest Freudian fantasies. And so that's the kind of stuff that, back in the day, back in our time, back before my time, it's kind of, what people used to call racism.
Absolutely. No, I mean, one of the things, for people who don't pay enough attention to my position on that period, even though having written for Barr, Black Agenda Report, and being, mentored by Bruce and Glenn, having parents who basically were young adults in the 60s who were shaped by the international anti-colonial movements, having two uncles who studied in the Soviet Union, who was reared by people like yourself that came out of that era. One of the things that I always remember talking to Bruce Dixon about was that, none of y'all were really dealing with like people in the factory, like working class people. It all seems like it was all, basically I made a joke about with him one time. I said, it strikes me as like everyone read Franz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth and like all had like a mental orgasm and just like blew everyone's mind or something. And it's just like collapsed everyone's analysis into like everything from internal colonial theory to metaphors about third world countries. And we still see that today. And I've always made the statement, even though many people who watch the show for some reason think I'm a revolutionary nationalist, maybe it's because is that my favorite history of Black left politics is actually the old Black left of the pre-Popular Front and Popular Front and the Colored Farmers Alliance.
Right. Yeah.
They were about dealing with working class people.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree, man. And I tell you, another plug. Todd Cronin did a really great essay on Fanon and the appropriations of Fanon. Now, of course, I forget where. I think it might be in the Los Angeles Review of Books. I might be wrong about that, but people can find it, and what I suggest they read it. But one of the things I've thought about the Fanon thing for a long time too is that people didn't read The Wretched of the Earth. They read the chapter on spontaneity and force and violence, or they only read Sartre's intro, but they didn't read The Pitfalls of National Consciousness and the class and Fanon's critique of the class character of decolonization. And it's especially bizarre now because look how that third world stuff turned out, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, like, so somebody like me, who I came through the African Liberation Support Committee and, you know, part of the Marxist takeover and all that, just seeing what's happened in Angola and Mozambique and Portuguese Guinea, it, you know, would be heartbreaking, like if you couldn't let yourself be kind of tough-minded about understanding what's going on. And also, in one of those instances that shows that the apple doesn't always fall close to the tree, Patricia Harris's, Kamala Harris's father did the most powerful critique of the Black colony thesis that should have put an end to that, right, by 1972 or 3 or whenever the piece came out. But see, at that point too, man, when I was already working in like, the hybrid community development, poor people's organizing world. And so I spent a lot of time in the community development corporation world. And you could see where that stuff was going, right? I mean, what you could see, yeah, well, okay, so you open a 3,000 square foot Black supermarket and expect racial patriotism to get Black people to go there instead of Kroger's, right? But the only way that stuff could ever work would be if you had separated nationally and could try to do import substitution. But, you know, it was always nothing other than Black bourgeois business ideology.
No, I mean, it's listen, there are people today who are younger than me who are, you know, born in the 70s defending internal colonial theory. I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I've always thought it was bullshit because I was like, number one, none of you people come from a third world country that has ever been a colony. So for you to be perpetuating this, I was like, what is Kamala Harris and Cornel West and other, you know, left academics who are getting Ford Foundation grants? Where do they live in the colony? I mean, because, and first of all, what exactly analytically, and how does making that metaphor analytically help?
Yeah, no, it doesn't do anything for us at all, man. It's crazy. And I mean, I don't want to get myself in trouble, so I guess I'll put it this way. But when I hear that stuff now, like my first reaction is inward, please. I mean, because it's just foolish. And people say, but see, this is another thing that happens when politics gets disconnected from strategic goals or popular strategic goals, because the people doing this stuff have strategic goals, but they're careerists, right? But once that happens, like you can just say stuff because it feels good, it makes you feel good about yourself, right? And if you're really adroit, it can help you get on MSNBC.
Or you can get, you know, $250,000 grant from some kind of white liberal foundation.
Oh man,
what's wrong with that, Pascal? You would take the money. You would take the grant money, Pascal.
What'd you say?
I said you would take the grant money.
I'd probably take it, but at least I would be transparent about it.
Would you try to be Robin Hood with it?
Nah, man, I would.
No, just rims.
Grill, some grills too.
This is a statement I made on this show, and I'll be very honest with you. Like, as much as many people could misconstrue my politics as being, quote, revolutionary nationalist, yes, I was groomed by revolutionary nationalists. I have uncles who were literally Marxist-Leninists who studied in the Soviet Union. I have family members who wanted to, you know, my father was literally sponsoring a coup to overthrow Baby Doc. I mean, like, you know, this is, I've been around this kind of politics. The thing that's always been interesting to me is that there's a whole cadre of people who's never been around that politics, who mentally are still stuck in 1972, and aren't willing to confront why that politics failed in 1972. Besides the fact of saying, "Well, COINTELPRO got us."
Yeah, that's why I asked that question in the beginning, and I want to kind of focus on that question for 1 second here, Adolph. Is that somewhat dismissive to simply say that this Black Power politics, this kind of radical politics, again, that it's not just Black Power, it's also, certain factions of SDS and the Weathermen.
Mm-hmm.
And Rustin talks about this, like these people aren't even addressing the income inequality that they are a part of.
Right.
So when we're stuck in this moment that Pascal's talking about, it feels radical to embrace what is viewed as radical.
Right.
So then what is real radical politics if we're kind of stuck in this almost anti-radical politics?
Right. Well, it's funny. So in 98, Manning Marable, Kathy Cohen, Barbara Ransby, Cornell West, and Bill Fletcher. No, not Cornell. Bill Fletcher and Abdul Al-Kalimat organized this thing they called the Black Radical Congress. And some of my friends and I talked about it, but the first reaction was, well, so what's a Black radical, right? What kind of politics does that, what kind of political agenda does that betoken, right? And I went to, so the group of 5 met among themselves a number of times, and then they decided to have a meeting with 30 people in Chicago, and I attended that. But I said, from the very beginning, that the first time I heard anybody, because we were mainly us, right? Like we're mainly the Black radical version, or Black 70s radical version of the Wild Bunch, the Peckinpah film, right? Where this or this gang of aging desperados gets together to pull off one more train robbery, right? That's who we were. And I said at the time that if the first time anybody refers to us in a first person plural that presumes that we represent some Black community or some substantial force in the Black community, I'm going home, because I had just gotten in from a long flight from Denver and I was tired anyway. But there's that kind of posturing, right? And people become so accustomed to speaking in the name of the Black masses that they don't even realize that's what they're doing. But as water has continued to flow underneath the bridge or Gun Hill or whatever, it becomes clearer and clearer that no matter how much red, black, and green stuff you put on it, no matter how much kente cloth, right, or whatever, no matter how much you go, what you have to understand, brother, is that's Bookerite politics, and that's all it is, and it's the exact opposite, Pascal, of the Colored Farmers Alliance and Black labor organizing, or Black people's labor organizing, and Popular Front politics, right? Because it's a politics of representation, not a politics of action. But see,
they would call those Black people integrationists.
Oh yeah, oh totally. But see, if Clarence Thomas, say, and the right wings, or Herschel Walker, and the right wing Negroes are basically lawn jockeys, whose claim is that they represent some amorphous Black interest out there that's unspoken. If the liberals have the same thing, right? But they go to, like when Joanne Reed said in 2016 that Black people aren't interested in stuff like single payer healthcare and a right to a job. Black people want a reckoning. Well, so it's pretty clear that Black people, who she imagines herself speaking for when she speaks for Black people, but there's also another Bookerite aspect of this thing, which is that part of the claim is to project it onto rank and file Black people, to insist to them that that's the frame of reference, or that the PMC political agenda is their political agenda, and there's that racecraft, right, that makes trickle down look like something else when it's Black on Black. But I guess where I was going was to say that if the only political options that we have, if that stuff now is supposed to be the radical stuff, right, the BLM and the rest of the performance, like it's supposed to be what radicalism is, then the ruling class is in control of both sides, as the foundation money makes clear.
Well, someone asked a question that I found it really comical. It said, "So is Adolph saying that Black political interests are important? What is a Black political? Who's Black? Clarence Thomas is Black.
Right.
This is the part of the problem with this whole thinking.
Clarence Thomas is pretty Black.
Because it imputes that Black people are 12 Negroes sitting in a diner, and you can take all of their, you can basically take their opinion and decide, well, that's the Black opinion."
Yep. No, that's right, man. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that, by the way, also is what used to be called a long time ago racism. That belief.
No, because
but,
my biggest problem with all of this internal colony, revolutionary nationalism, we are a people, we are ADOS, is that it all reduces, and you call it a Bookerite agenda, it all reduces to what I call consistently the politics of containment. Because all you are doing is pouring Black people into a jar, and the ruling class chooses the Negro to be the broker, whether he's a revolutionary guy with a dashiki, an afro, and a kufi, or whether he's, a member of the National Urban League, or whether he says ADOS reparations, my brother and sister. They choose the broker, and everyone else that is in the container gets the scraps from the fatback and biscuits.
Yep. No, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, and that was the Bookerite agenda too, right? Yeah, so it's the same thing, totally.
So that is to me the greatest lesson of reading what I tell Torre I call the Reed tradition. He was like, "Why do you call it the Reed tradition?" I said, "Because that's what it is, man." I said the greatest lesson of the Reed tradition, and if you and I have talked long enough, you know that you get a lot of contempt, particularly from our revolutionary left comrades. I recently saw a piece in Black Agenda Report that were calling you out by name, saying, "Oh, Adolph Reed denies racism," and I've always confronted these charlatans who have not read your work, who have not really put in the time to understand the dedication you've had to Black politics, and I find it problematic. But the frustration I've had with the Reed tradition, and I've said to you this before, and I'm going to bring it up, is that it's too valuable for Black people to not be exposed.
Oh yeah,
to Black people. And I've said this before, is that, and I'm saying this as someone I have a lot of affection for, who I consider a mentor, is that I think that there's never been a problem with what you're saying or your scholarship. Mm-hmm. It's that it is hard for Black folk who are radical, who love Black people, to take critiques of their politics that are true when they are being spoken to white people who are left or otherwise, who they fundamentally have a history, maybe legitimately, of distrusting.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. And I'll say a couple things. One is that I've gotten to a point now where I don't want to talk to anybody's radicals. Right. I mean, no matter what color they are, because they're all booked into the same politics. So like I try to spend as much time as I can talking to union workers, and I take every opportunity to do that, and especially to black trade unionists, right? But yeah, apart from that, I mean, so like this is so when I did the notorious what are the drums saying Booker essay in the Village Voice in 1995, right? I had people say to me, and I'm black people whose politics were more or less correlated with their costumes, right? But would say to me, well, I'm not objecting to the critique. I'm objecting to the fact that you did it in a white publication like the Village Voice. And my response was, well, so what do you think all these other motherfuckers are writing? Excuse me. Well, you can bleep that out if you have to. Right now, I mean, where are they publishing? What do we know about them, right? We know about them because they are touted in mainstream media, right? And now they're part of mainstream media. So I just think that criticism is fundamentally a dodge. I mean, I'm familiar with it, right? I've been familiar with it for a long time. But if your politics is such that, and there's a difference between publishing stuff in right-wing publications, which I steadfastly resist to do, right? I mean, even though some of them tend to court people they imagine to be iconoclastic leftists, right? But I don't do that. If black publications would ask me to write something, I'd do that too. I mean, if other black podcasts would invite me on, like, so I just did the kickoff keynote or the keynote address at the kickoff brunch for the University of New Mexico's Black History Month program. And I mention that because in 2019, it had to be, or the very beginning of 2020, Touré invited me to do the Black History Month lecture on the Atlanta child murders at ISU. And that was the first Black History Month invitation I'd gotten since Ken Warren and I went to the University of Michigan around in the late 1990s, I think. So I'm not on that circuit, right? And frankly, if you're politically serious, the critique is the critique where it appears, right? And if people, and I know that there are people who don't like the idea of having the black person make the critique of black politics in what they understand to be a white venue, but they operate in those white venues themselves on all the time. I haven't seen the Moms Mabley Foundation giving $6 million to Black Lives Matter or whatever, right? I mean, so I just think it's a dodge. I mean, I take the point, but and I want to affirm, if anybody out there wants to ask me, like, I'll be happy to do it. I'd love to do it, right? As you know, there is one Black nationalist podcast in DC that I've been on a few times. Actually, I was on a good one by his brother Howard. It was quite smart. I'm blocking his name right now. But those people don't want to have a debate anyway. So, or a real discussion even. Like I think debate's pretty useless, frankly.
I'm going to ask you. This might seem like a controversial question, and not to seem race reductionist, but I want to ask this question: do you believe as a scholar of Black political history and Black political thought, that you have a particular interest, or I don't want to say duty, interest in communicating your analysis of Black political phenomenon to elements, whatever class element of people in the Black community. In other words, is that important to you?
Yeah. I mean, I did 2 workshops and a roundtable in August here, actually, at the Teamsters National Black Caucus Convention, and it went very well. And I've done enough things with the Black leadership or Black advisory group in Atlantic City United here local. I'm going down there again next month to do some other stuff. That's mainly what I want to do. And I've been talking to other people in that union too. I mean, that's because the response is very interesting, right? And I know I've written about this, but in both 2016 and 2020, when I was working in the Sanders campaign, small groups of Black people would approach me and ask me why Bernie wasn't making a special appeal to people in his program. And I would say to them, well, look, let's just go down the program item by item. And you stop me when you get to the one that wouldn't disproportionately benefit Blacks and Hispanics. And from working people, they could see the point. And everybody said, yeah, well, right, I can see the point. It's from the PMC who didn't want to accept that a broadly redistributive political agenda would benefit Black people. And that's because they're interested only in racial, or many of them, the most vocal ones of them, in racial redistribution, not in economic redistribution. And it's back to that point where their ideal of a just world is one where all the goods and bads are distributed according to population share, and as greater percentage of Black people are rich as a percentage of white people who are rich, and poor as a percentage of white people who are poor. And on that point, I'm not sure I've quite pulled this together yet, but this study that recently got the buzz in the New York Times and elsewhere about low birth weight and infant mortality rates, right? So I read quickly, but I want to go over it again more closely. A friend and colleague of mine pointed this out to me. I read the research report because I was curious. There are cross-class comparisons. Cross race comparisons that show, for instance, that rich Black women are 1.25 times more likely than poor white women to have what I think it might be infant mortality. What you have to really dig right inside the report to show or to find is that rich Black women are 1.5 times more likely. Poor Black women are 1.5 times more likely than rich Black women to have the problems. So there's actually a greater intra-racial disparity, right? Than there is the disparity that gets hyped, right? Rich Black women suffer more than poor white women. Well, that's what makes a good ad copy, but it's just like the COVID stuff, right? And the point here is more to tell us the name or the label that we need to put on injustice that applies to Black people than it is to establish causal mechanisms or propose treatment, because it comes down to the closest thing you get to causes that explain the racial difference are redlining and history of its effect, environmental racism, and what's the other one? Racism, right? Or racist doctors, so you need to have more black doctors, right? The same study shows that across the board in Sweden, right, everybody's better off than everybody here, and the differences by class that we see here don't exist in Sweden, and it's never asked, well, why, right? Because you have a whole different care system and a different system of public provision. But see, this is the same stuff that happened with the Chetty study a few years ago, right? You remember, which found that horror of horrors, rich black people are less capable of passing on their wealth and class status intergenerationally than rich white people are. So why the hell am I supposed to be concerned about that? Right? Or why should what working black person be concerned about that? And like one of the points I've been making, and like in these union talks, look, more than 70% of the so-called racial wealth gap exists between the 10% of richest black people and the 10% of richest white people, and it got shit to do with you, right? And in fact, the least well-off 50% of whites and blacks have exactly the same amount of wealth, zero.
But
that's
the
where
wealth gap for whites, apparently, don't white people give other white people money? Isn't that how it works?
I think that's right. Well, I think we all know people like that, right? Like,
when is Oprah sending us our check?
Yeah, isn't that how it works?
Right.
When is Oprah sending us our check?
But I mean, people respond to that too because they know it once you hear it, right? And the thing is, trickle down. And I mean, it really does take craft, right, to mask the fact that giving rich black people stuff is supposed to make non-rich black people better off too, right?
Well, the funny thing about this, and Jason and I talked about this, and I put some stats about this, the economic growth that's happened in the post-civil rights era has happened almost exclusively amongst the black people in the top 20 percentile, and in the top 5 percentile, their income has doubled, while for the bottom 80 percentile, their income and wealth has stayed flat.
Well, and that's why they have to keep shouting racial disparity, because they don't want anybody to hear what you're saying.
Well, we're going to have more of this conversation in the Champagne Room. If you are a patron, the link is already up. MT, are we going to open the phone lines?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, okay. So we're going to open the phone lines. Pascal, are you ready for the phone lines to be open?
Ready to rock and roll. Adolph, you have the Champagne Room link, right?
All right. Yep.
Did you send? I'll send him the right one because I had to change it. That's why we were.
Send it to me too because I had the old one.
I'm gonna send you the right
one.
Wow.
I'll
send you the right one right now. I'll send it to both of you guys in an email. So thank you guys so much. If you guys are having a good chat conversation, call in and ask your questions. There's only one way to do it. Become a patron. Patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. For as little as $3 a month, you can call in and be a part of these conversations, and you can see Pascal do karaoke.
Can I say something?
No.
We are currently at 99 likes on YouTube. Could you be like 100? Could that be you? 99 likes. We're so close.
Tanky
so
Bot, if you haven't liked the show, Tanky Bot, who I believe is Kevin Powell. From now on, refer to Tanky Bot as Kevin Powell. Tanky Bot said black people can't be racist and then said the most racist thing ever. So, Tanky Bot, until you prove otherwise, you are Kevin Powell in that episode of The First Real World. Black people can't be racist. Look at Pascal. Did I trigger Pascal?
Man, this is a great conversation, man.
Are you ready for the champagne room, brother?
Ready to rock and roll.
Let's go. Thank you guys so much for checking this out. Share it with your friends. And we are
out.
Black.
That too.